A delegation led by Vice Minister of Commerce Wang Shouwen went to the US last week and held a dialogue with their US counterparts on trade issues. But little progress seems to have been made. Where does the negotiation between the world's two biggest economies go from here? In a hearing held on August 24th, many representatives of US companies gave negative feedback on the $200 billion tariff list. According to China Business News, only 27 of the 312 delegates were in favor of further tariffs. How will President Trump handle the opposition and carry on with his agenda? What impact will it have on the Chinese and world economies? The RMB has been dropping recently, and its depreciation offsets tariffs to some extent. What's the connection between currency and the trade war, and what does the future hold for the RMB? The US wants China to be more open to the export of American goods, but levying tariffs makes it even more difficult to accomplish this. So what is Trump's goal in this standoff?
Well, last week, a Chinese delegation was in Washington to resume trade talks with their US counterparts. But by the weekend's end, there was no breakthrough whatsoever, and new tariffs kicked in on both sides. So what are the key issues stopping progress, with tariffs continuing to escalate? And what measures are both sides taking to limit damage? Or will they? What are the likely consequences of continued tension? To talk about all these and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Zhao Zhongxiu, Vice President of the University of International Business and Economics, and Mr. Jake Parker, Vice President of the China Operations for the U.S.-China Business Council. Well, that's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue. So, Mr. Zhao, I want to start with you. The talks took place actually last week, but is lower level talks compared with previous rounds, and there was no announcement of major decisions or deals. So, where we are in terms of the trade talks?
Well, so far the trade talk between two sides is just keep connected, and so there's the low expectation for this low level the negotiations. And before this the talks formally start, and President Trump has in his Twitter said he has no anticipation for the result of that, and so we know in the meantime there is a hearing for the new round of the tariff, and also they will repose the $16 billion. So I suppose that this thing intentionally to continue this.
So are you saying both sides are using stalling tactics at this moment? What are they waiting for?
I think waiting for the time change.
Midterm elections?
Yes, I think this is the key factors for the current stage. Since from I guess from the U.S. side, especially from President Trump, he intend to continue this and show his strong to the voters.
And Mr. Parker, as far as you know, how do American businesses feel about what is going on between the two sides?
Well, American businesses support the ideas that President Trump has raised and agree with many of those concerns, particularly concerns about IPR protection and concerns around forced technology transfer. It's not a problem for every company that operates in the China market, but for those that it does affect, it's acute and very serious. I think it's important to go back to the point on midterm elections. We do hear fixation on that here in China when we meet with Chinese government officials. I would just caution that though there is likely to be no deal between now and the midterm elections, we should not underestimate the political realities in the United States. Both Democrats and Republicans, the White House and Congress, are aligned in their concerns about China and some of the implications of the business practices and the openings here in the market.
If that is the problem, do they agree on the solution of President Trump to solve the problem by imposing tariffs on almost everything from China?
So one of the things that we would argue is that business community, companies that operate in the China market who have benefited greatly from operating here in China have always been the ballast of the U.S.-China relationship and have been supportive of positive U.S.-China relations in Washington. Whenever there was a strategic concern in the past, whether it was the South China Sea or issues with North Korea, the U.S. business community was always there to ensure that there was a stable voice advocating for a positive U.S.-China relationship. However, over the last number of years, expectations of China's economic reform have been very high and have frankly fallen short of expectations. So while the business community's optimism has decreased, they have been quieter in Washington, D.C., and that vacuum, their voice in Washington, has been filled by the strategic voices, those in the intelligence community and the military who are much more concerned about the issues that have much more of a concern about destabilizing the U.S.-China relationship.
But has it changed the fact that the economic cooperation between the two sides is still the ballast for bilateral relations? And the unintended consequences of a real trade war could be huge.
The unintended consequences of a trade war will absolutely be huge. I agree with you 100%. And while the economic side of the relationship remains the best part of the relationship, it's much less supportive than it used to be because of that declining optimism among the business community.
Let's talk about the Americans' tactics now, because we understand the Trump administration is now reaching out to Mexicans and Canadians to have come up with a new version of NAFTA. Some people argue the merits of the new NAFTA agreement, but probably Trump is trying to seek support from both within the domestic politics and seeking better terms from his partners in North America so that he can concentrate on China. Is that what is happening?
Well, so far it's the yes, now, he fight, anywhere, but, now next step is that they'll concentrate on China. So, I mean, for the first level is the trade war. And behind this is the, this matching for the development strategy or the past. And and also his trade team, their vision is, on one hand, bring back some manufacturing to the United States and give the job to those who lost their job, But but the reality is, not in the United States. Well, the unemployment was very, very low. And now it's very, very hard to find the workers to build the new house, open for the new factory, So this is the one hand. And the other hand, for the existing, the global production network, currently in the world, U.S. Was the hub of the production network, China, it's a little bit lower level, and Germany in Europe. Now, this trade war will try to reshape this production network, to reshape the supply chains, and then will contain the Chinese development.
But the problem is, whether those policies from the government, either from the U.S. or China, can really reshape the global value chain. For example, tax reduction, more tariffs on Chinese imports will really make those investors think again when they're making decisions and try to bring back manufacturing on wholesale back to the States. Is that possible?
There's a lot of questions there. I think the one right off the bat is, when we talk to our member companies, 200 U.S. large multinational companies with significant business interests in China, more than 85% of them are manufacturing in China to access the domestic Chinese market. It is not profitable to manufacture in the United States, ship their products to China, and remain competitive with the Europeans, Japanese, and domestic Chinese manufacturers. So for those companies, they're going to continue to invest in China to access the domestic market.
What about manufacturing in the U.S. and then sell products to China? Would that make economic sense?
No, it doesn't make economic sense unless you're a company that doesn't have an economic advantage for manufacturing domestically within China. One thing I would note, though, is for those companies that are affected by tariffs, who are exporting to the United States or have significant products that are integrated in China, they are beginning to consider how they can shift their country of origin away from China to other places where they have existing manufacturing.
How would that happen?
So they would lower their capacity in an existing plant in China. Maybe they're operating at 100% today. Maybe they drop that to 50% in China, and then increase their capacity at an existing Brazilian or European plant so that that product can have a shifted country of origin which isn't affected by the tariffs, which can then be exported to the United States.
But the problem is they made the choice to manufacture in China not only because the labor here is cheap, but also it's because it is a well-developed supply chain, other things. Can those things be copied elsewhere, for example, in Brazil and South Africa, as you said?
They can't be done overnight. But if companies believe that the trade conflict is going to last in the medium and long term, then supply chains will begin to shift.
So what will be the real consequences if the global supply chain has such a major overhaul? Can we foresee the consequences?
Well, actually, this is not we worry about. The trade war breaks, damage this the supply chain, or we call the global value chain. And since there is when we talk about the economy, when manufacturing, we have the economy of skills and the economy of the scope, and now of the economy of the network. And we have established this network, and then we will change this or even reshape. I mean, this is the topology, and maybe you can have some breaks, but if you want to build a new chains in other places and consider that's all your suppliers, and if you can move all the suppliers out of China, and then it's impossible. Even like what's it called, the iPhone, they have the huge investment back to the United States, and with the $10 billion US, but they didn't bring the latest network to there, because there is no supply network to support this. They just take an old one.
I remember Tim Cook once said he has actually visited many places around the world to try to find the suppliers. And here, only in China, the factories have the skill sets of the workers, can provide and deliver those opponents in the time frame that he expected, in the qualities that he expected. That thing has changed, has it? Will other places provide the same services and goods?
No, I don't think so. It takes a long time. This is this learning by doing, and also this the the accumulation of these skills. So then when we talk about why you call China is the factory in the Asian factory, and you can provide the goods of high quality and deliverable on time, and for some, the manufacturing capacity is irreplaceable.
Let's talk about the trade war itself, because the Trump administration is now looking at potential further $300 billion US dollars in tariffs against Chinese exports if the current round doesn't deliver what he wanted. That means basically all of the Chinese goods will be tariffed by the US. Will that happen first? What will be the consequences, Mr. Barker?
I don't know if it will happen or not. I know this week in Washington, D.C. that we have hearings and more than 200-300 individuals are testifying for and against the tariffs. Only the U.S. Trade Representative knows if they'll come into force.
But do you think the Trump administration will go all in trade war?
It's my expectation that the Trump administration has been very clear that if the list of asks that it's delivered to the Chinese, if those are not offered to the Chinese during the round of negotiations where the set of principles came to China, if those are not seriously negotiated, then there is a possibility that those tariffs will come into effect.
But there is the definition of serious, because the Chinese has been saying, we have our own reform agendas. We cannot reform our economic governance as you requested on your timeline. So I don't think China will capitulate to the U.S. demands as it is erased by the U.S. It is a deadlock here.
Yeah. And China will not dance with the order from the U.S. But actually, during this testimony, the hurry, and there is some description of that, and it seems that it's superficially go through these procedures, and actually the supermajority of the representatives, they against the tariff, actually over 80%, even more higher, because they said there will be no real impact for what they concern, because most of the products as not for the tele transfer or whatever, and this is not replaceable. But I doubt that administration, they will intend to take that, and this is one of the strategy to pose the pressure for China.
But I think the Trump administration's calculation is that China will run out of bullets at last, because obviously China imports less than the U.S. does. So if they raise the tariffs to $500 billion US dollars of Chinese goods, what are going to China do?
Well, since what's the real map of this, for U.S. I'm very pleased to meet you. So American firms, they have the invest outside the United States. They invest in the local market, sell in locally. So if come back, you just take all the manufacturing back, like Ford. You don't produce car in China, sell in Chinese market. You just take back, produce in United States and export to China, and that's irrational.
Do you think it is possible that the Chinese authorities will make American businesses feel the pinch here in China because of the tariffs threat from the U.S. side?
And so far, Chinese government announced that we will protect all the firms, company, either this the Chinese company or the foreign invest company, and we promise, we guarantee our open policy. We will not discriminate these enterprises, even now we have these structures. And when we talk about the trade in goods, we don't talk about the trade of service. And with China suffered a huge deficit, and we don't talk about what's so-called affiliate business in China, like how many Chinese people we use the shampoo produced by P&G, and how many cars produced in China, and among others. So this is the huge $600 billion US dollars in local sales.
So, Mr. Parker, are you feeling comfortable that you will run your businesses as an American business here in China without the threat of being retaliated against?
No, I'm not confident about that. Despite the professor's words, I do think that the Chinese government has also said that in addition to the quantitative measures that we'll see in response to tariffs, there will also be qualitative measures. And we've already begun to see those at the local level.
What is your understanding of qualitative measures?
I think it's additional scrutiny of regulatory processes at the local level. We've certainly begun to see it at customs with increased inspection rates. In the past, one company told us that the random inspections were at about 2% of imported goods. For a period this year, it went up to 100%. We've heard of fruit importers being added a week of quarantine, and by the time that quarantine is done, the fruit from the United States is spoiled and can no longer be sold.
And do you understand the rationale behind this, if it is the truth?
Well, I would go back to what the professor said, and our U.S. investors that are invested in the China market would like to be considered as domestic Chinese companies. They would like for their products that are produced here to be considered domestic products. And as good investors, they'd like to have equal protection under China's laws.
And I think the Chinese government understand those businesses running here are not only for the interests of American businesses, but also for Chinese consumers. It makes no sense to punish them if China wants to open up further, right?
Exactly. Since we benefit from this globalization, we benefit from this integration of the economy, and but if you for our trade partner, you want to cut the business link, and what's the for the future? That's what's China's reaction. Currently, China said we will not export. We do our best to maintain this open economic system. We try to reduce the impact to the economy.
I'd like to talk a little bit about currency, because the Chinese currency's value has been dropping. Some American analysts say this is deliberate because China wants to use the depreciation of Chinese currency to make up for the loss in trade. Is this what the Chinese have been thinking, Mr. Zhao?
Well, this actually the interest rate is to reflect the expectation of the prospect of the economy. Since China, we are relatively weak, and we are not in the high part of the values, and some cases will damage our supply chain, and they worry about this, and also there is some I would say it's the outflow of the capital. So there is well, in the short term there is
so people are panicked about the prospects. But you think it will get some correction later on because the fundamentals of China's economy hasn't been shaken that much by the trade issue yet.
Could I offer one thought on that point as well?
Mr. Parker?
It's interesting for me to see any comments in the United States about RMB manipulation because actually if you look at the numbers in Q1, RMB appreciated by 4%. Then from April until today, it depreciated by 8%. That leaves it a depreciation net to date at around 5%. That's the lowest amount of depreciation for any of the BRIC countries. It's also less than the euro and the pound.
So it hasn't been fluctuating that much.
One would just say that if China is manipulating its currency, then so are many other economies in the world. The reality is that the U.S. dollar is strong.
And the fact is that many emerging economies' currencies have been devaluing over the past several months.
That's right.
So it's not just China. China actually doing, I don't think that China's regulators are intentionally doing anything to devaluate its currency because of the trade issue.
No. Even, the current BAF, for China currency, we are less than British pounds.
That's right.
Yeah. British pound. So when we look at U.S., with the U.S. dollar, it's so up, but you look at the British pound and the euro, it's not relatively stable.
Let's talk about the strategy here, because many people worry that this is not only about trade or economic structure. It is more about what we Chinese say comprehensive strength of a nation. And the Americans are worried about China gaining more ground and pushed the U.S. out of many economic or even security areas. Is this an agreement among the American elites and also the grassroots that China is a threat?
I only represent U.S. industry, and I wouldn't be able to speak to any kind of grand strategy in the United States. I can say, however, that what U.S. industry wants is to ensure that it's treated fairly locally. If there are requirements, whether de facto or de jure, for it to transfer technology to a domestic competitor or to a domestic JV partner as a prerequisite for doing business in the market, then that technology would not be given freely. It would have been forced to be given. And when those situations arise, we don't think that tariffs are the right answer for dealing with them. We believe that taking those cases to the World Trade Organization, litigating them there, and raising the concerns directly with the Chinese government through negotiations.
I want to pin you down on that technology transfer issue. What is your assessment of technology transfer in China, American technologies? Do you really believe there is a systematic stealth of American technology or forced technology transfer happening in China?
Well, as I mentioned, it's not a problem for every company that operates here. We do a survey of our member companies every year, and last year around 23% of them had reported being requested. 23% of our companies had requested to transfer technology in China. Part of that is because of the joint venture requirements that we're all aware of. But a bigger,
which they understand before they come into agreement.
Which they do understand before they enter the market. But I would say the bigger concern is through the many regulatory processes that they participate in here in China. If I could just offer one example. For an environmental impact assessment in the China market to open a new manufacturing facility, a panel of experts is formed to review the plans, the process, detailed technical information that our companies would consider.
But is the same for every enterprise here in China? You think you've been picked unfairly?
I would say that every enterprise that operates here is unfairly treated in an environmental impact assessment because the panel of expert, which is convene to work with them. For a Chinese company, it may be acceptable to have a domestic research institute sit on that panel. For a U.S. company to have a state-owned enterprise competitor sit on that panel, along with a research institute that has a vested interest in their technology, is a little more concerning and is something that our companies have raised.
Then
as
why
a
didn't you
significant
appeal
problem
the
in
case
China.
to a higher authority or a court which can adjudicate over such a case?
So this is an administrative licensing process. It cannot be adjudicated. It cannot be appealed. It is the only way that an environmental impact assessment can
So
be
this
granted.
is a lot of complaints from some businesses, Western business, about whether there is a level playing field here in China. Can Chinese authorities do anything about it to make them feel assured about this is a fair place to make business?
Well, for the technology, for the technology transfer, and for the market, and you know, how you can maintain this technology gap, and make it static, and so then from supply side, you have technology, you monopoly. So monopoly, you can charge high fees, you get the market premium for the technology. So this is the we respect this because you use the accumulation of the technology. On the other hand, understand from demand side, if you are the unique buyer, it's the monosonic, and you have the purchasing power. But now this complaint, you cannot use your market power to give the pressure or when deal for the price. So I don't think you can maintain the technological gap. Let's take a case before 20 years
But
ago.
how to reduce that gap in a fair way that is acceptable to both?
Actually, there is a spillover effect for the technology. You cannot, if you just, always there will be some, re-innovation. There will be learning by doing, and so this is the process of the technology. You cannot, just I take this technology. You're not allowed to do this or that and to do this we call re-innovation. But that's the problem. That's the problem.
And how concerned are you in a matter of months or years in terms of the business environment here in China and the global supply chain? What is your assessment?
So what's very interesting is our companies are doing better this last year in terms of profitability.
You mean your company?
Our U.S. member companies
Okay.
are doing extremely well from a profitability and revenue growth perspective. However, there is a concern that in the medium and long term, they may be squeezed out of the market by Chinese industrial policies and by preferences for domestic content and government procurement and also private procurement. So while we have an excellent situation today, I think there's a feeling that
You
in the
worry
medium
about the
and long
future.
term- That's exactly right.
What message do you expect the Chinese authorities send to make you feel assured?
What we would like to see is for China to eliminate any kind of distinction between U.S. and domestic technology and companies. We'd like to see all catalogs eliminated and for state-owned enterprises, private companies, and foreign companies to all be regulated under China's company law.
But this is the message the Chinese already sent. Well, this is we will give you the national treatment as any other local businesses. The key is enforcement. The enforcement probably has some problems case by case. But I think the trend is still there. Don't you think so, Mr. Zhao?
Yeah, actually, in that case, there is what we would say is when you talk about the Chinese, our the market characteristics or the demand path, there is a dilemma. Either just as President Trump mentioned, when he took the office in China, it's got very bigger, faster.
Okay, I think we're running out of time here on this edition Dialogue. Thank you very much, Mr. Parker, and thank you, Mr. Zhao. Very interesting topics and very interesting discussion. You've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Joe in Beijing. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye for now.